Hey everyone, our story begins with a man named Ghislaine Perdium. Long before this moment, people knew him only as Count Perdium's useless eldest son. Yet now, the North's greatest knight lies broken, unable to accept that this supposed failure defeated him. The battlefield around them is burning, and Ghislaine calmly admits that he spent a fortune building the trap. Fire races across the field, while the last surviving enemy finally understands how completely his army was cornered. Hidden behind black armor, Ghislaine asks whether his opponent enjoyed the plan that destroyed everyone around him. The dying knight recognizes him and spits out the old insult, calling Ghislaine the same garbage everyone once mocked. Ghislaine answers that the trap was only the beginning, because he knew exactly how many soldiers would arrive. He had counted the enemy's strength before the battle even started. He had also identified the spies hiding among his own forces. Even the reinforcements those spies intended to summon had already been anticipated and cut off. The knight's eye widens as Ghislaine explains that every secret move was visible to him from the start. Surrounded by the bodies of his hidden soldiers, the man realizes that his final advantage never existed. He tries to cling to one last ace card, but Ghislaine has already accounted for that too. Disbelief turns into a scream, and Ghislaine ends it with a single merciless strike. He tells the defeated knight to be quiet, treating the execution like the final line of a finished calculation. As he walks away, Ghislaine promises that no matter how many times he must fight, he will win every time. His confidence comes from one terrifying advantage. He knows his enemy's plans before they can unfold. To understand how he became that man, the story moves back 1 year. A much younger Ghislaine jolts awake on a rough bed, gasping as though he has escaped death itself. He checks his hands and chest in confusion, unable to understand why he is alive and completely uninjured. Only moments earlier, he remembers facing an enemy he had pursued for years. Their final clash was vicious, with blades carving through the battlefield faster than Ghislaine's wounded body could endure. By the end, he was collapsed in the dirt, barely able to lift his head. A final spear of force tore through him and left his body drenched in blood. Standing over him was Idun, one of the continent's 7 noble knights, who declared that the war was over. The red-haired knight looked almost disappointed that the feared mercenary king had reached such a miserable end. Idun offered him last words, but Ghislaine admitted only one regret: he had failed to complete his revenge. Even while dying, Ghislaine cursed him and demanded the truth behind the destruction of the Perdium family. Idun dismissed the demand as arrogance from a man who had already lost everything. He reminded Ghislaine that he had abandoned his family long ago, so his sudden loyalty sounded hollow. Ghislaine ignored the insult and demanded to know how Idun possessed information from another kingdom. Idun answered that he had spent years working in the shadows just to track Ghislaine down. He then revealed the real cruelty. His people had helped Duke Delphine's household bring down the entire Perdium family. The word "we" struck Ghislaine harder than any blade. Idun confirmed that other hidden powers stood behind the massacre, far beyond the household Ghislaine already hated. Ghislaine dropped to his knees, realizing that the conspiracy was much larger than he had ever imagined. Idun refused to explain further and told him to accept his fate before the final blow arrived. Ghislaine screamed that he would never forgive them, even as blood and exhaustion stole the last of his strength. Idun answered with a quiet "okay," showing no fear of the hatred in Ghislaine's eyes. Then his sword fell, decapitating Ghislaine and ending the mercenary king's life. Yet Ghislaine is now staring at the younger face, reflected in a basin, with his head still firmly on his shoulders. His first thought is that the entire execution was a hallucination, but the unfamiliar youth in the reflection is real. He wonders whether enemy mages captured him and reshaped his body for some cruel experiment. Before he can settle on an answer, someone outside calls him young master in a voice he remembers. The visitor is Ricardo, a soldier of Perdium who casually says he knows Ghislaine is awake. The moment Ricardo enters, Ghislaine's old instincts take control and a sword flashes against the soldier's throat. He restrains Ricardo from behind and promises to spare him only if every question receives an honest answer. For a moment, the cold eyes of the mercenary king stare through the face of a frightened young noble. Ricardo sweats under the blade, stunned by killing intent that his spoiled master should never possess. Even so, he complains that Ghislaine has crossed the line and refuses to play along with the threat. Ricardo is even more confused by Ghislaine's reaction, because the attacker somehow looks more terrified than the hostage. He knocks Ghislaine away and scolds him for turning another tantrum into something dangerous. According to Ricardo, Ghislaine exhausted himself during that tantrum and passed out for a nap. Then Ricardo mentions the orcs, and the single word freezes Ghislaine in place. Apparently, his younger self had been demanding command of the squad assigned to raid them. Ghislaine stops arguing and asks where everyone is going, desperate to identify the exact day he has returned to. Ricardo answers that they are heading back to the Perdium estate, as if the destination should be obvious. Ghislaine's expression breaks the moment he hears that name. He grabs Ricardo and demands that he repeat it, ignoring the soldier's startled apology. Perdium should be a fallen estate, so hearing that it still exists feels impossible. Outside the tent, the entire territory stretches across the valley, peaceful and completely untouched. The view collides with Ghislaine's memory of ruined walls, black smoke, and his family home reduced to ash. Ricardo assumes he suffered a nightmare and warns him not to call his own household a fallen ruin. Still uncertain, Ghislaine pinches his own cheek to test whether the world will disappear. Ricardo flicks him for acting ridiculous, and the ordinary pain confirms that this is no dream. Memories rush back, and Ghislaine begins piecing together the life that led him to Eden's sword. As a child, he resented the Perdium household instead of valuing the people around him. His immaturity repeatedly caused trouble, while nobles and servants treated him like a disgrace. Unable to withstand the criticism, his younger self ran away from home and abandoned the family entirely. Years later, after surviving endless battlefields, he rose from a runaway noble into the mercenary king. Only then did he return to Perdium, hoping his achievements could make up for everything he had done. He arrived too late. The estate had been crushed, its banner burned, and everyone he loved was already gone. But in this returned past, the banner still flies, and the home he lost is standing in front of him. Ghislaine looks toward the sky as the truth settles in. Every person he holds dear is alive again. Relief overwhelms him so completely that he nearly starts singing in the middle of the camp. The joy vanishes when another memory surfaces, because this exact day carries a disaster of its own. He confirms with Ricardo that the soldiers gathered here are preparing to raid the orcs. Ghislaine remembers the raid as the day most of the squad died because his arrogant younger self chased glory. The report claimed there were only 3 ordinary orcs, making the mission sound easy even to an inexperienced noble. In reality, more than 20 orcs were waiting, and his reckless interference turned the ambush into a massacre. The enemy can still be beaten, but Ghislaine first needs soldiers who despise him to trust his commands. Before he can decide how to persuade them, a violent crash throws a soldier across the camp. Ghislaine turns toward the impact as the ground erupts beside him. The guards finally shout that the orcs are here, but the warning comes after the attack has already begun. A mass of red-skinned warriors pours through the camp, trampling the unprepared soldiers in its path. Ghislaine realizes the attack has arrived earlier than it did in his previous life. The orc swarm crashes through the formation before anyone can organize a proper defense. A terrified soldier screams for everyone to get into formation. Squad Commander Skoven overrides him and orders a defensive formation, trying to stop the panic from spreading. An orc tears through the front line before Skoven can stabilize it. The commander curses the report when he sees how badly they are outnumbered and how little time remains. Someone shouts a warning, but Skoven only notices the danger when it is already behind him. A massive orc raises its weapon over the commander's exposed back. The strike explodes against the ground, missing Skoven by a fraction of a second. Ghislaine has reached him first, grabbing the commander and pulling him out of the killing blow. He drags Skoven clear while the orc's axe cuts through the space where the man's body had been. Skoven stares at the young master in disbelief, unable to understand how Ghislaine reacted that quickly. Before anyone can question him, Ghislaine meets the next charging orc head-on and slices through its attack. His borrowed blade moves with the precision of a veteran, not the clumsy strength everyone expects from him. A second cut tears through the orc's arm before the creature can recover. Skoven and the nearby soldiers can only watch as their useless young master dismantles the attacker. The wounded orc howls, but Ghislaine never gives it enough space to counterattack. He completes the exchange with a clean finishing strike that drops the creature in front of the entire squad. Ghislaine clicks his tongue at his weak body, realizing that he cannot properly use mana yet. Then he looks across the battlefield and asks Skoven to confirm that he is the commander. Without explaining himself, Ghislaine extends a hand and tells him to give it over. Skoven does not understand what the young master is asking for in the middle of an orc assault. Ghislaine makes it clear. He wants the commander's authority, and he intends to take control of the battle. With the surviving soldiers still reeling from the ambush, Ghislaine demands command before another life is lost. Skoven cannot believe the reckless young master is asking for authority while lives are still on the line. He refuses immediately, and Ghislaine is genuinely surprised by the answer. Skoven reminds him that command is not a game, and that Count Perdium personally entrusted him with these troops. Ghislaine finds the refusal annoying, even though he admits that he would have rejected his former self too. Another orc charges before their argument can continue. Skoven orders Ghislaine back and tries to take responsibility for the fight himself. Realizing that words will not change the commander's mind, Ghislaine decides to prove what he can do. He bursts past Skoven before the older soldier can stop him. Skoven shouts after him, convinced the boy is throwing his life away. The commander can only watch Ghislaine enter the creature's reach. Then his anger turns to confusion when Ghislaine remains perfectly calm. A single precise thrust pierces the orc through its weakest point. The enormous warrior collapses before it can finish attacking. Ghislaine leaves his sword buried through the fallen creature as casually as if the result were obvious. Skoven is stunned that a supposedly useless noble identified a weakness even trained soldiers had missed. Ghislaine asks the commander whether he understands the most important requirement for winning a battle. Behind them, terrified troops struggle to hold back the remaining orcs. Ghislaine explains that frightened soldiers need momentum before discipline or orders can matter. He tears his weapon free and charges straight into the enemy formation. The narrow battlefield erupts as one young swordsman collides with an entire pack of orcs. Each strike draws more of the creatures toward him, while the soldiers regain enough space to breathe. Even Skoven begins to smile when he realizes the battle is no longer following the enemy's rhythm. Covered in blood, Ghislaine openly challenges every orc still standing. He declares that he will kill them all and makes himself the only target they can see. The enraged warriors surround him from every direction. Ghislaine slips between their weapons and punishes every exposed opening. Skoven wonders if he is dreaming as the infamous weakling dismantles veteran warriors. The commander knows that even a mana user should struggle here, making Ghislaine's performance almost impossible. Yet he can also see the cost, because Ghislaine's untrained body is already tiring. Ghislaine survives by wasting no motion at all, turning aside attacks by the smallest possible margin. Every counterattack lands on a joint, artery, or weak point chosen through decades of battlefield experience. To Skoven, the boy now resembles a swordmaster fighting without a trace of mana. That realization leaves the commander staring at him in disbelief. Ghislaine mocks the orcs and claims that he has not even finished warming up. He insults their pride as a warrior race, deliberately making their rage overpower their judgment. Every remaining orc abandons the soldiers and charges at the young master together. The troops panic and call for Skoven while Ghislaine appears to flee. Skoven cannot understand why the boy would surrender the advantage he just created. Drawing the orcs away was brilliant, but the direction of Ghislaine's retreat looks suicidal. Beyond him lies Perdium's settlement and the steep ridge overlooking it. Skoven finally recognizes that Ghislaine is running directly toward the edge of a cliff. The commander hesitates, terrified by the plan forming in his mind. Then he orders every surviving soldier to raise a shield wall. Instead of questioning him, the exhausted men agree to follow Count Perdium's eldest son. They race toward the ridge while the orcs continue chasing Ghislaine. Ghislaine glances back, trusting that a competent commander has finally understood his intention. His older body could have cut them all down, but this young body lacks the stamina for such a fight. Even so, he has gathered the enemy closely enough for Skoven to finish the job. Ghislaine changes direction at the final instant and sends the front rank stumbling toward the ridge. The orcs realize the trap only after their own momentum has carried them too far. Behind them, Skoven's shield wall arrives like a solid wave of steel. Ghislaine smiles because every piece is now exactly where he wanted it. He leaps clear of the collision as soldiers and orcs converge at the cliff. From the air, he gives Skoven the signal to move. The commander roars for the troops to advance together. Their shields slam forward with one order: push every orc over the cliff. The trapped warriors claw at the ground, but the soldiers refuse to give them room. Skoven and the front line drive through the enemy with everything they have left. One after another, the orcs lose their footing and tumble into open air. The entire pack falls from the ridge in a tangled mass. They crash against the rocks below, ending the ambush in a single decisive maneuver. The soldiers can barely believe that they survived and defeated every orc. Their relief disappears when someone notices that Ghislaine is still falling beyond the edge. His borrowed sword catches against the cliff, leaving him suspended over the drop. Ghislaine looks upward while his exhausted fingers begin losing their grip. Skoven stares down at the boy who just saved all of them. For one tense moment, neither man knows whether Ghislaine can hold on. Skoven reaches over the edge and orders him to grab his hand. Ghislaine admits that his body no longer has enough strength to climb. The sword slips free before their hands can meet, and Ghislaine falls beyond Skoven's reach. The commander can only stare down in horror as the young master disappears below the ridge. In the darkness, he hears a young girl calling him by the affectionate title of older brother. The familiar voice makes him whisper Elena's name. Fragments of his younger sister's smiles, anger, and loneliness surround him like broken memories. Ghislaine recognizes them as moments with Elena that he failed to treasure in his first life. A memory of her hand reaches toward him and begs for his attention. As a child, Elena had repeatedly asked her brother to go places with her. Ghislaine wakes abruptly, still reaching for the sister he remembers losing. He finds himself lying in a quiet room, rather than at the bottom of the cliff. Seeing his living hand confirms that he survived, and Ghislaine assumes the soldiers must have recovered him after the fall. For a moment he wonders whether the battle and the vision of Elena were only a dream. The pain that strikes when he moves answers that question immediately. Every muscle aches from forcing an untrained body far beyond its limit, but the pain proves he survived. A cautious voice at the door asks whether its master is awake. Belinda, Ghislaine's personal tutor and attendant, rushes inside with obvious relief. Seeing another person he lost leaves Ghislaine almost unable to say her name. Belinda scolds him for fighting the orcs after she warned him to leave the danger to trained soldiers. Instead of arguing, Ghislaine suddenly pulls her into a grateful embrace. Belinda freezes in confusion, while he can only say that he is glad to see her. She had stayed beside him throughout childhood, despite every selfish mistake and public disgrace. After Perdium's destruction, Belinda disappeared, and Ghislaine never learned what became of her. Because they see each other every day in this timeline, Belinda cannot understand his overwhelming relief. Ghislaine decides that the fastest way to protect everyone is to tell her what he knows. He warns that a catastrophe will soon strike Perdium, leaving Belinda certain that the fall injured his mind. Ghislaine insists that he is about to explain the truth. He bluntly claims that he died and returned to life, but Belinda assumes the orcs merely frightened him. She tells him that his reckless behavior is a greater immediate danger than any imaginary disaster. As her lecture continues, Ghislaine realizes that an unbelievable confession will never persuade her. Belinda then asks how he planned to attend next week's festival after nearly crippling himself. The word festival unlocks a much darker memory. Belinda reminds him that Lady Elena has been waiting to attend it with her older brother. She hopes the outing might finally repair the distance between the two siblings. Ghislaine looks toward Elena's picture while the forgotten date settles into place. He remembers himself alone after the event that destroyed their relationship and changed his entire life. Trying to hide his alarm, he asks Belinda exactly how long remains before the festival. Her answer is 1 week, confirming the date he feared. In his memory, Elena stands outside his door and timidly asks whether he is inside. Ghislaine recalls the face of the sister he ignored when she needed him most. Young Elena had begged him to attend the festival with her. Now Ghislaine remembers the terrible truth. 1 week from today, Elena will die. Back at the estate, Ghislaine embraces Elena so suddenly that his younger sister can only stare in shock. Elena assumes this is another cruel prank and forces him away, while Ghislaine marvels at the surprising strength hidden in her small body. She reminds him that he recently called her disgusting and ordered her to disappear, forcing Ghislaine to confront how viciously his former self treated her. His sincere apology leaves Elena and Belinda wondering whether the orcs damaged his head, especially when he insists that he defeated them himself. Seeing everyone alive fills him with regret, because in his first life he rejected Elena's festival invitation, and her mutilated body was discovered soon afterward. Ghislaine steadies himself as Elena's bodyguards, Jamal and Philip, arrive to escort her to oversee the festival supplies. He is surprised that the young lady handles ordinary work, only to learn that impoverished Perdium lacks enough servants for the task. Elena prepares to leave, and Ghislaine realizes how little attention he once paid to his family's daily struggles. He volunteers to help, stunning Elena and Belinda before following them into the busy castle marketplace. The servants reject his offer because his reputation makes them more afraid of his interference than grateful for another pair of hands. Ghislaine remembers that Elena's corpse was found near the slums, meaning someone lured or carried her away from the festival grounds. Before Ghislaine can investigate, the elderly retainer Fergus rushes over and celebrates his survival against the orcs. An exhausted Belinda immediately asks Fergus to take the suddenly strange young master off her hands. Ghislaine cannot inspect the castle without drawing attention, so he asks Fergus to guide him somewhere private. The old man is stunned when Ghislaine chooses an abandoned training field and says he genuinely intends to train. The supposedly abandoned facility is still clean and fully equipped. Fergus quietly maintained it for years because he never stopped hoping Ghislaine would eventually take his duties seriously. That quiet loyalty reminds Ghislaine how many good people he failed to appreciate. He wishes Fergus a long life, though the old man dismisses his confession about dying and returning as another piece of foolishness. Once alone, Ghislaine reflects that his old suspicion made him treat loyal people like enemies. But he has only 1 week to correct that mistake. He remembers that a neighboring lord was blamed for Elena's murder, triggering the war that eventually destroyed the entire Perdium household. Because Elena's death began the family's downfall, Ghislaine resolves to change the chain of events from its very first link. His immediate problem is physical. This young body is weak, but a week should be enough to regain basic control over mana. Ordinary warriors struggle merely to sense ambient mana, while Ghislaine learned to recognize it amid countless chaotic battlefields. He draws the scattered particles together and spins them into a concentrated core inside his body. Creating one core is effortless for a veteran of thousands of battles, yet one ordinary core never made him one of the continent's 7 greatest warriors. Ghislaine combines a technique from a half-burned magic book with the body's natural core, allowing him to build a second and then a third core. The connected cores form an explosive mana network, but his immature body reaches its limit at 3, even though his former self sustained 5. The method consumes an enormous amount of mana, and Ghislaine bitterly remembers Eden exploiting that weakness by bringing an entire Night Order after he was exhausted. The technique remains unstable, but youth gives him time to perfect it and enough confidence to vow that Idun and every force behind Perdium's destruction will die. 1 week passes while Ghislaine trains and quietly completes his preparations. When the festival arrives, he walks into town beside Elena and watches every familiar street with new caution. Elena is amazed that he actually came and questions his week of relentless training, since responsibility toward the Knight family never interested him before. She recalls how openly he once resented their father, yet admits that his recent behavior feels like the older brother she used to love. Ghislaine watches her carefully, aware that even small changes in his behavior can redirect the future. Belinda leaves Elena's safety to Jamal and Philip, while Ghislaine reminds himself that major events may repeat even as smaller details shift unpredictably. His task is to use future knowledge without assuming the timeline will obey him, and he believes his preparations are ready. He keeps one hand near a concealed weapon while accompanying Elena through the crowded food stalls. After enjoying the celebration together, Elena grows bored, and Ghislaine becomes uneasy because the festival is nearly over without the remembered disaster occurring. A sudden invitation to visit a new attraction elsewhere immediately catches Ghislaine's attention. Jamal claims that a friend told him about another event, and Elena eagerly agrees to follow him. Ghislaine's expression hardens as recognition arrives. Elena's own bodyguards are the traitors who lead her to death. Jamal and Philip were once celebrated as Elena's most trusted protectors, yet Ghislaine now recognizes them as the traitors who delivered her to death. The bodyguards lead the siblings into an abandoned street and insist that a performance will begin there, but the filthy, empty location immediately alarms Elena. Ghislaine notices obstacles deliberately blocking every escape route, while Elena tries to leave before the trap can fully close. Jamal grabs the surprisingly strong girl and Philip restrains her, exposing their intentions before she can run. Elena demands an explanation, and Philip calmly says they accepted a reasonable request from someone else. Armed men emerge from hiding, led by a man named Frank, and the bodyguards announce that they have brought the young lady as promised. Frank is annoyed that Ghislaine came too, but Jamal offers the eldest Perdium's son as a free bonus who followed them to his own grave. Elena condemns the betrayal, while Jamal admits that he plans to flee the poor, barbarian-plagued territory after collecting his reward. Ghislaine moves before Philip can react and kills the first traitor with 1 mana-enhanced strike. Philip's sudden death turns Jamal's confident laughter into panic. He makes one distinction clear: others may abandon Perdium, but these two sold a child to her killers. Jamal attacks in fury, desperate to avenge his partner and escape with Elena. Ghislaine answers instantly, driving his sword through the second traitor before Jamal can complete the attack. As Jamal collapses, Ghislaine catches Elena and gathers his frightened sister safely into his arms. Frank's men are shaken because the supposedly untrained noble just eliminated experienced knights with precise attacks reinforced by mana. Elena calls for her brother in terror, and Ghislaine gently knocks her unconscious, so she will not witness what follows. Frank thanks Ghislaine for removing the unreliable escorts and asks whether he has secretly concealed his true skill. Ghislaine counts 3 remaining enemies and senses that the man in the center possesses far more mana than the others, forcing him to finish quickly. He asks who ordered Elena's kidnapping, but Frank refuses to answer because he expects Ghislaine to die there. The kidnappers decide to capture him alive, break every limb, and prolong his suffering for their employer's pleasure. Ghislaine answers by launching a firecracker signal and attacking through the burst of light before they can surround him. Frank dismisses the distraction as a shallow trick, but Ghislaine uses it to cut through the first exchange. Steel flashes repeatedly through the alley as the kidnappers attack Ghislaine from several directions. He parries without wasting movement, using every exchange to read Frank's rhythm and locate the true threat. A perfectly timed ambush still fails when Ghislaine blocks from an impossible position and immediately counters. The strongest attacker slips behind him and lands a clean strike across his neck. Ghislaine admits the blow would have beheaded him without mana, while his enemy realizes he concentrated energy around his neck at the instant of impact. Unable to understand such advanced swordsmanship in a boy, the assassin gathers his power and promises that the next strike will end him. Ghislaine survives Frank's killing blow through superior mana control, even as the assassin insists that the boy's feeble reserves cannot overcome him. Frank charges with the confidence of a veteran facing an underpowered child. Ghislaine only smiles, calmly slipping past the first barrage while measuring the gap between their current bodies. The assassin believes Ghislaine lacks enough mana to threaten his reinforcement, until a completely different force punches through his defense. Frank's connection to Elena's murder removes any reason for restraint. Ghislaine opens all 3 of his newly created cores and releases the power he spent the past week building. Mana from the 3 cores floods Ghislaine's limbs and multiplies his speed. His striking power rises just as sharply, turning the alley into a blur that Frank can barely follow. Every blocked attack numbs Frank's hands, and he cannot comprehend a method that increases mana so explosively. To Frank, Ghislaine now appears to be an entirely different person. He breaks through the kidnappers' formation, dismantles their support, and leaves the once confident assassin battered on the ground. With the battle decided, Ghislaine returns to his original question and demands the name of the person who hired them. Frank refuses and tries to kill unconscious Elena as a final act of spite, but Ghislaine intercepts him before the blade reaches her. Ghislaine offers a deal: answer honestly, and he will sheath his sword, while mana threads bind Frank so tightly that he cannot move. Ghislaine knows an experienced mana user may eventually break the threads binding him. He presses directly against Frank's core and begins scattering the energy inside it, turning the assassin's own mana into a lethal threat. Frank warns that the slightest mistake will trigger a backflow powerful enough to kill them both. Ghislaine never hesitates, and that absolute confidence convinces Frank that the threat is controlled rather than reckless. Terrified of dying, Frank confesses that Count Desmond ordered the abduction to manufacture a pretext for war between Perdium and Degald. Ghislaine confirms that Elena was selected as the sacrifice, then ignores Frank's protest that their agreement was supposed to spare him. Frank laughs that his death changes nothing because the operation involving Degald is complete, and the coming war will still destroy Perdium. Ghislaine answers that one impossible fact changes everything. He died once, returned, and will not allow the same future to occur. Once the confession is complete, Ghislaine ends Frank before the assassin can exploit their agreement. He eliminates the remaining kidnappers as well, ensuring nobody can report that Elena survived or explain how the plan failed. The moment the danger passes, the borrowed strength collapses. Backlash tears through Ghislaine's immature body because detonating 3 cores is far more punishing than it was at the height of his old power. Fighting to remain conscious, he remembers that another corpse was found beside Elena, at this location in the original timeline. The victim is Degald's son and his escort, murdered so their bodies could frame Perdium for the crime and ignite the planned war. Ghislaine decides to erase the planted evidence and destroy the conspiracy's intended story before anyone can discover the scene. Elsewhere, a furious conspirator learns that Frank and the escort knights failed because of the supposedly useless Ghislaine Perdium. The report describes a fighter completely different from every rumor about Ghislaine. Rather than reconsider the young lord, the superior blames the failed agent for the costly setback and orders him eliminated. One subordinate is killed without hesitation, warning everyone else what another failure will mean. Desperate to save his life, the agent proposes removing Ghislaine through a duel that will appear legitimate. He claims to know the perfect opponent, someone close enough to approach the heir without raising suspicion. His choice is Cain Rogues, Ghislaine's cousin and a young swordsman famous throughout the north for overwhelming physical strength. The target's family connection to Ghislaine can create a natural meeting and a believable quarrel. The superior approves the plan, but he makes it clear that failure this time will not earn another chance. Back at Perdium's training hall, our protagonist, Ghislaine, tests the control developed during his week of practice. He moves a weapon without touching it and decides the technique is finally stable enough for practical use. Fergus interrupts the training when it is time to eat. Before leaving, he watches Ghislaine demonstrate a mana thread, energy compressed into a string capable of moving objects from a distance. In his old body, Ghislaine could control many threads at once without effort. His current reserves allow only one, yet even that leaves the experienced Fergus unable to understand how the supposedly lazy heir invented it so quickly. Fergus explains that he came to thank Ghislaine for saving Elena from the traitors. Ghislaine accepts the gratitude awkwardly and says protecting his own sister was simply what he should have done. Several days pass, and the festival remains suspended because 2 trusted knights attempted to traffic the young lady. Elena complains that nobody believes Ghislaine rescued her, while Belinda assumes Jamal and Philip were merely perverts acting alone. Ghislaine knows the truth. Elena survived and the immediate war was prevented, but the enemy will try again and he cannot defend Perdium alone forever. To build a military force, he must enter the political and financial problems he ignored in his first life. A furious crowd gathers outside the castle after the festival is cancelled. Local merchants demand compensation because the lost celebration has erased income their already struggling businesses depend upon. Belinda explains that the planned celebration ended after only 1 day. Hearing how much that single lost event hurts the population, Ghislaine finally understands how desperate Perdium's economy has become. He tells Fergus to send soldiers to calm the protest, only to learn that none are available because most were dispatched after the orc raid. The map makes Perdium's position brutally clear. Northern barbarians threaten one side, while the forest of monsters presses against the other. With danger on both fronts, the territory's limited soldiers are stretched far beyond what its empty treasury can support. Ghislaine considers paying from his personal funds to calm the dispute. Belinda reminds him that Count Perdium eliminated his allowance long ago after years of gambling, waste, and reckless spending. She has no money to lend either, leaving Ghislaine with future knowledge but no soldiers or capital to act upon it. Ricardo suddenly rushes in with another problem. Ghislaine's cousin Cain has arrived and demands to see him. The visitor does not wait for permission to enter the estate. He announces himself by smashing through the attendants in his path and leaves a trail of injured servants behind him. Cain finally reaches Ghislaine after forcing his way through the castle. He approaches with the easy confidence of a man who believes the coming confrontation was decided before it began. The scheme brings Cain Rogues to Perdium, heir of an allied county, and the cousin Ghislaine remembers as both his only childhood friend and his enemy. Cain's face is impossible for Ghislaine to forget. That effortless confidence once dominated their friendship, even as years of humiliation slowly turned the relationship poisonous. Ricardo explains that Kane heard Scoven repeat the story of Ghislaine's recent victories. Convinced the commander was lying to flatter a useless heir, Kane beat Scoven for refusing to retract it. Kane dismisses the assault as a harmless wake-up call. He refuses to believe that the cousin he always looked down upon could defeat orcs and train traitors with his own hands. Ghislaine remembers being treated like Kane's subordinate rather than his cousin. Every visit left Perdium damaged and Ghislaine humiliated, yet Kane received praise while his victim was blamed for the chaos. A moment of hesitation tells Ghislaine that Kane did not come merely to bully him. Disguised conspirators promised support for Loges if Kane could provoke a formal duel. Ghislaine's death would then be dismissed as an unfortunate accident between relatives. Kane is uncomfortable with murdering his own cousin, but ambition outweighs that reluctance. Ghislaine understands that saving Elena changed the future so sharply that the hidden enemy now considers him a target. Kane demands the alcohol, entertainment, and women normally prepared whenever he visits. He expects the old Ghislaine, desperate for approval, to obey without asking a single question. Ghislaine remembers paying for every one of Kane's indulgences from his own pocket. The expenses continued for years and were never repaid. Instead of feeling embarrassed, he suddenly recognizes Kane as the source of money he desperately needs. Ghislaine agrees so casually that Kane assumes nothing has changed. Then he asks when his cousin intends to repay the debt accumulated across all those years of expensive visits. The total reaches 1,000 gold once Ghislaine adds years of interest. Kane calls the spending a fee for his friendship, but Ghislaine calmly treats that excuse as another unpaid charge. He calls the old relationship what it was, demands payment before violence becomes necessary, and admits that he needs a great deal of money immediately. The attendants fall silent because nobody has ever heard Ghislaine challenge Kane this openly. Kane answers by calling him a parasite and a northern scoundrel who has mistaken fabricated rumors for real strength. Kane's disguised escort launches a sudden attack in full view of the witnesses. The staged violence is meant to make Ghislaine look like the aggressor and manufacture a respectable reason for the duel. Ghislaine reads the staged blow before the escort completes it. He intercepts the strike and drives the knight backwards so quickly that the surrounding crowd cannot understand what happened. He tells the fallen man to stop pretending because he clearly blocked the strike, while Kane loudly accuses Ghislaine of attacking without cause. Once alone, Kane and his escort congratulate each other on the performance. They believe the witnesses saw enough hostility to justify the planned duel and secure the reward promised to Loges. Kane begins a righteous speech condemning Ghislaine for dishonoring nobility and prepares to issue the challenge. Ghislaine cuts him off by challenging Kane first, citing the insult to Perdium and the assault committed by Kane's knight. Kane thinks his cousin has dug his own grave and accepts, warning Ghislaine not to regret the decision when he dies. Ghislaine immediately calls Ricardo and orders him to gather every protesting merchant, promising that the duel will make them serious money. Ghislaine turns the cancelled festival's frustrated crowd into an audience for the duel. Merchants recover some of their losses by selling food, drinks, and wagers around the improvised arena. Kane condemns the noisy marketplace surrounding what he calls a sacred duel. He warns Ghislaine that surrender will not save him once their swords finally cross. When the betting closes, every visible wager favors Kane. Not one spectator has backed Ghislaine because the entire county considers his cousin's victory guaranteed. The merchants even suggest betting on how long Ghislaine will survive until one unexpected wager is placed on him. Elena ignores the attendants warning her not to waste her money. She stakes it on her brother, giving Ghislaine the only public vote of confidence in the arena. Kane grows impatient with Ghislaine's composure and offers the younger fighter the first move. Ghislaine refuses the favor and invites the supposedly superior swordsman to attack whenever he is ready. The calm invitation insults Kane more than any open taunt. He charges with the crushing physical strength that made his sword famous throughout the north. Kane's first blow tears through the arena with enough force to shatter an ordinary guard. The crowd immediately assumes Ghislaine cannot survive even one direct exchange. Elena's attendants panic because they understand Kane's usual method. He overwhelms opponents psychologically, forces them to waste energy evading, and waits for exhaustion to create an unavoidable opening. Ghislaine keeps slipping around every heavy swing without committing to a clash. Kane mistakes that patience for fear and mocks his cousin for being skilled only at running away. Kane finally drives Ghislaine toward the edge and believes the retreat has nowhere left to go. He unleashes a finishing strike and declares that his cousin crossed a line he can never take back. At the final instant, Ghislaine condenses mana into his legs instead of meeting the blade. The burst restores his balance and carries him beyond a blow everyone else considered unavoidable. He calls Kane's swordsmanship ignorant, explaining that raw strength only works because frightened opponents convince themselves they cannot retaliate. Ghislaine stops retreating and steps directly inside Kane's next attack. A precise counter breaks the larger man's rhythm before the sword can build momentum. Every movement comes from a lifetime of war against enemies far more dangerous than Kane. The crowd finally realizes that Ghislaine may actually win. Kane looks at the shallow wound and understands it was deliberately limited, proof that his cousin could have cut much deeper. The implication humiliates Kane. His despised cousin controlled the exchange well enough to choose exactly how badly to injure him. Ghislaine declares that the gap in skill is too large to entertain the crowd. He discards his sword and promises to finish Kane's education with his bare hands. Then Ghislaine proposes a bare-handed contest as a handicap. He adds 2,000 gold to his wager, and the merchants celebrate what they consider an extremely profitable act of madness. Fresh bets pour in, and after witnessing Ghislaine's swordsmanship, some spectators finally risk their money on him. Kane accepts the bare-handed condition but immediately twists it to his advantage. Ghislaine must discard his weapon completely, while Kane will continue attacking with a sharpened sword. Belinda mocks Kane for demanding that an unarmed opponent pick his sword back up. Kane attacks anyway, swinging the sharpened blade with enough force to end the duel at once. Ghislaine slips past the first cuts using empty hands and timing refined across decades of combat. His footwork keeps him just beyond the lethal edge. Ghislaine steps through Kane's guard and smashes a fist into his face. Before Kane can recover, a second counter snaps the larger man's head back. Kane crashes to his knees, bloodied by the cousin he expected to dominate. The defeated swordsman stares at the changed Ghislaine while the crowd erupts in disbelief. Ghislaine orders Kane back up, and humiliation replaces the confidence on his cousin's face. Unable to accept the reversal, Kane launches himself into another furious charge. Ghislaine slips inside the renewed attack. He batters Kane aside before the larger man can regain control of the duel. Ghislaine feels pity not for Kane, but for Count Lojas. The older man continued supporting failing Perdium for years because his friendship with Ghislaine's father mattered more than profit. Years earlier, Kane begged his father to stop pouring money and soldiers into a broken northern land. Count Lojas refused because abandoning a friend in need would have violated everything he valued. Kane interpreted that unconditional loyalty as Perdium stealing his inheritance. The resentment now drives him toward murder, even though Ghislaine's father never demanded anything in return. Ghislaine declares that the first lesson is complete and knocks Kane down again. He orders his cousin to keep standing until he finally understands the difference between inherited confidence and genuine strength. Unable to endure another beating, Kane finally admits defeat in front of everyone. The gamblers who trusted him watch their money disappear. Alina is almost more shocked than they are because she expected the feud to continue until someone died. With victory secured, Ghislaine turns Kane's humiliation into another solution for Perdium. He announces that his cousin has generously volunteered to buy meat and drinks for everyone present. The county cheers the young lord who restored their celebration. Ghislaine quietly adds the feast to Kane's original debt and demands the full 3,000 gold wager as well. A quiet threat makes Kane understand that refusing payment will cost far more than money. The next day, Ghislaine counts enough gold to hire a small mercenary corps. Ordinary investment could grow the fortune, but not quickly enough to stop the enemies already moving against Perdium. Elena and Belinda see the enormous pile and reach a completely different conclusion. They assume Ghislaine intends to spend the fortune on an extravagant birthday gift for Lady Amelia, his fiancée. Their teasing ends with a revelation Ghislaine somehow forgot completely. In this timeline, he is already engaged. The fiancée waiting at the end of Ghislaine's next plan is Amelia Rayfold. In the present, the North admires her generosity and kindness. In the ruined future, she becomes the Witch of the North and helps Duke Delphine destroy Perdium. Belinda confirms that Ghislaine's father will remain away from the estate for another week. That window is enough for Ghislaine to visit Rayfold and collect the money needed for his next move. At Rayfold, Amelia personally distributes food to desperate citizens. She orders attendants to provide clothing and shelter as well. Before the watching crowd, she insists that nobody in her city should remain barefoot while she enjoys comfort. The kindness changes the moment Amelia is out of public view. Bernarf praises the performance because every grateful citizen strengthens her position in Rayfold's coming succession struggle. Amelia questions another knight about his reported loss to a northern swordmaster. He admits that he concealed his real ability because an easy victory would draw attention to the private force she is building. The charitable noblewoman is only the face Amelia shows the territory. Her real upbringing taught absolute obedience, careful manipulation, and contempt for anyone too weak to protect their usefulness. Her hidden Actium guild buys reconstruction materials throughout Perdium. The operation quietly recaptures Rayfold's aid money while recruiting skilled soldiers who abandon the impoverished territory. A servant interrupts the private meeting with an unexpected visitor. Ghislaine has arrived without warning and claims that he needs to discuss the merchant guild, immediately putting Amelia on guard. Ghislaine enters as though he remains the harmless fiancé everyone remembers. He presents an early birthday gift and deliberately praises flowers purchased through the secret Actium guild. The guild's name tells Amelia that Ghislaine knows something he should never have discovered. She hides that alarm, pretends not to understand the warning, and tries to dismiss him after accepting the gift. Ghislaine orders her to sit before she can end the meeting. None of his former nervousness remains, and he bluntly demands a personal loan of 10,000 gold. Amelia asks whether the request represents Count Perdium, but Ghislaine insists it is personal and notes that she never intended to marry him anyway. He hints that Amelia prefers Bernarf and knows she is secretly accumulating power for Rayfold's succession, a dangerous truth she never expected him to possess. Ghislaine promises that her secrets remain safe, only if he leaves with the money. Amelia answers the blackmail by summoning Bernarf, a swordsman already comparable to the Northern Swordmaster. When Ghislaine warns that killing an heir could start a territorial war, Amelia calmly prepares a story about a reckless intruder and orders Bernarf to kill him. Faced with genuine killing intent, Ghislaine decides that polite negotiation is over and prepares to fight seriously. Bernarf attacks the moment Amelia gives permission. Ghislaine evades the first lethal combination without revealing his own limits. Each narrow escape lets him measure the bodyguard's speed, reach, and preferred rhythm. Ghislaine calls the supposedly polite household's ambush remarkably poor hospitality. Bernarf answers that an unannounced scoundrel who upset Amelia deserves neither courtesy nor a safe departure. Their blades collide repeatedly as Bernarf increases the pressure. Ghislaine continues reading the attacks instead of committing to a counter. Amelia loses patience with the test and orders her bodyguard to bring her Ghislaine's head. Bernarf asks Ghislaine to stand down for his own protection, then agrees to abandon restraint when the heir refuses. The next exchange becomes too fast for Amelia to follow cleanly. She cannot understand how the infamous failure of the North is matching the strongest knight under her command. Ghislaine turns aside another attack, with an unusual defensive motion. Bernarf recognizes the repeated pattern and changes his angle before the counter can form. He warns that the same trick will never work twice against him. Bernarf's adjustment drives a heavy blow through Ghislaine's defense. Ghislaine reinforces his body with mana at the instant of impact and remains standing despite the damage. Bernarf recognizes swordsmanship forged through real battle rather than formal lessons, but he believes such chaotic techniques cannot defeat him. Ghislaine admits that Bernarf's relentless head thrusts, control of distance, and larger body make him a terrible opponent at close range. Ghislaine cannot afford the reserves required for a prolonged duel. Mana threads spread through the room and turn the furniture, debris, and open space around Bernarf into a controlled battlefield. The tightened threads restrict Bernarf's movement from several directions at once. He answers with raw power, tearing apart the room as he forces his body through the trap. Bernarf orders Amelia to leave because he can no longer guarantee her safety and declares that he will fight with everything he has. Ghislaine welcomes the escalation, exhilarated to finally encounter a worthy opponent after returning to the past. Amelia rages over secrets Ghislaine should have no way to know. His recent victories prove that the change in him is not a temporary burst of luck. For the first time, she considers that the former fool may understand enough to destroy everything she has prepared. Elsewhere in the estate, a mysterious servant connected to Perdium moves through Rayfold's security without attracting suspicion. He remembers Amelia's childhood fascination with spiders, and the patience with which she built hidden webs. After confirming her identity, he quietly asks for her cooperation in a larger plan. The approach reveals that Ghislaine is not the only person inside Perdium surrounded by secrets. Back in the reception room, Bernarf releases enough mana to fill the shattered space with pressure. He condemns Ghislaine's improvised battlefield methods as the habits of a savage. In Bernarf's eyes, such desperate tricks are unworthy of a noble swordsman. The duel intensifies until even Amelia decides the destruction has gone far enough. She orders both men to stop, but the momentum already driving their committed attacks cannot be withdrawn cleanly. Bernarf commits to an attack designed to end the fight immediately. Ghislaine cannot block its full power with his current reserves. Instead, he accepts a wound through the shoulder and uses that contact to deflect the blade away from a fatal line. Even after the deflection, Bernarf remains dangerous enough to reverse the exchange. Ghislaine keeps advancing because hesitation on a real battlefield means death. The difference becomes clear. One man fights to survive, while the other has always been protected enough to treat combat as entertainment. Ghislaine still respects Bernarf's control of speed and reach. The knight also uses binding clashes to deny the smaller fighter room to maneuver. With only his normal reserves, Ghislaine admits that he cannot overpower those advantages directly. That limitation applies only while Ghislaine relies on his normal reserves. He decides the information and money at stake justify the risk. Ghislaine opens the hidden third core of his unique cultivation method. Explosive mana floods Ghislaine's body and erases the physical disadvantage in an instant. Bernarf tries to adjust, but the sudden increase in speed and strength reverses the fight before he can rebuild his defense. Defeated and exhausted, Amelia finally throws over the requested 10,000 gold and orders Ghislaine to disappear. Ghislaine calls the destruction a minor disagreement between lovers, then announces that Amelia's resistance has raised his fee to 20,000 gold. Behind Amelia's response lies a secret pact with Duke Delphine. The Duke will support her rebellion and claim to Rayfold if she helps eliminate Perdium. Ghislaine's impossible knowledge threatens both sides of that agreement, making his survival personally dangerous to her future. Amelia cannot openly deploy Rayfold Knights without leaving evidence that could start a war. She turns instead to the wild felines, criminals and assassins whose deaths can be denied. A dozen mana-skilled fighters receive orders to ambush Ghislaine in the narrow valley leading home. Amelia watches him leave with 20,000 gold and promises herself that the humiliation will be repaid. Ghislaine also chooses not to kill her, because exposing the struggle now would drag Perdium into a territorial conflict it cannot survive. Outside Rayfold, Ghislaine's companions confirm that the backup plan succeeded and their escape route remains open. The victory has a cost, because backlash from opening the third core leaves his young body weak again. Belinda places a hand on Ghislaine and forces precisely compressed mana through his damaged pathways. The stagnant energy clears far faster than ordinary treatment could manage. Her control makes Ghislaine wonder why someone with such extraordinary skill has spent years serving as a rural headmaid. Belinda promises to support the changed young master as long as his actions protect the family. In return, she demands an explanation for risking his life to extort Amelia. Ghislaine says every coin is required for one urgent project that cannot wait for Perdium's finances to recover naturally. He announces that they will develop the Forest of Beasts, a project Perdium has failed to accomplish since his great-grandfather's era. Before returning home, Ghislaine insists on visiting a person Fergus located through old records. Amelia's pursuit proved that personal strength alone will not be enough. What he needs now is a true commander capable of leading an assault force, not another bodyguard. The directions lead them to a ruined residence that appears nearly abandoned. Belinda calls into the darkness and doubts that anyone capable of commanding cavalry could still live in such poverty. A sick, exhausted man answers and immediately orders the noble visitors to leave. Beneath the ruined appearance, Ghislaine recognizes Jillian, the legendary captain of the Rutatosk mercenary group. Ignoring the man's ruined condition, Ghislaine greets the warrior from his former life with genuine relief and says that he missed him. Rutatosk accepted only veterans who had mastered several weapons and survived impossible campaigns. Its legendary commander was Gillian, the broken man Ghislaine has now come to recruit. Jillian has no patience for nobles and refuses to hear Ghislaine's offer. The hostility disappears when Ghislaine mentions the disease slowly killing his daughter. He claims to know a cure for the illness every healer has called incurable. Rachel suffers from eternal punishment, a disease that marks the body while steadily destroying it. In the first timeline, Jillian spent every weapon, coin, and connection searching for a cure. After Rachel died, the legendary commander lost his final reason to live and took his own life. Belinda doubts a simple medicine can succeed where priests and healers failed. Ghislaine asks her to trust the knowledge he cannot explain yet. He gives her a precise list and orders every ingredient purchased regardless of cost. The cure will not be discovered until years later, long after Rachel's original death. Its key ingredient is the costly fairy blessing, ground into powder and combined with carefully measured herbs. Strong spirits extract the medicine while removing impurities. Ghislaine remembers the surprisingly simple preparation because Gillian's tragedy once made the discovery impossible to forget. Rachel drinks the mixture while Jillian watches for any sign of harm. The red spots covering Rachel's skin begin fading almost immediately. For the first time in years, Gillian allows himself to believe that his daughter may genuinely survive. Ghislaine explains why the priests failed. Divine healing only stimulates the body's natural recovery. This medicine attacks the disease itself, and Rachel should completely recover within 1 or 2 months. Overwhelmed by relief, Jillian offers to become Ghislaine's dog or slave in exchange for Rachel's life. Ghislaine refuses the broken servant and asks instead for the true leader who once commanded Rutatosk. Ghislaine speaks about rebuilding Perdium with a certainty that does not belong to the reckless heir Gillian expected. That purpose reaches the part of Jillian buried beneath years of despair. When the veteran straightens, his soldierly presence returns so completely that everyone sees a different man standing before them. The restored commander immediately asks whether anyone followed the party to his home. Ghislaine admits that many people already want him dead, confirming that Gillian's old instincts are needed immediately. The warning comes a moment before an assassin strikes the ruined residence. Jillian intercepts the attack without hesitation and demands to know who sent a killer after his new master. Ghislaine already suspects Amelia and has no need to question the intruder himself. He leaves the assassin to Jillian, whose movements become brutally efficient now that Rachel's illness no longer chains his mind. With Rachel's future restored, Jillian kneels before the young lord who saved her. Jillian pledges his life to young Lord Ghislaine Perdium. Ghislaine accepts the veteran's loyalty, giving the reconstruction plan the experienced commander it desperately needs. Inside the Wildcat smuggling ring, Captain Viego receives the report from Jillian's ruined home. The reconnaissance team sent after Ghislaine has been killed. More alarming than their deaths is the proof that Ratatosk's former commander has finally returned to action. Ghislaine's group leaves Rayfold with Rachel safely inside the carriage. Jillian brings the enormous collection of weapons gathered across his mercenary life, while everyone hurries to clear the canyon before Amelia's hunters arrive. Belinda identifies the Wildcat Guild as a criminal network of assassins, smugglers, and traffickers. Many of its fighters are former mercenaries accustomed to ambush and dirty work. Ghislaine remains calm because the man beside him once commanded mercenaries, far more dangerous than these. The road collapses beneath the convoy before it can leave the narrow passage. Hidden mechanisms seal both directions and separate the carriage from open ground. Attackers rise along the canyon walls while others block the remaining exits. The scale confirms that Amelia prepared a full ambush rather than a small pursuit. Viego Valanos steps forward as the commander of the waiting force. He once served as Ratatosk's 5th Unit commander and built his identity around the legendary company. When Jillian disbanded it, Viego blamed his old captain for destroying the life he believed would last forever. Jillian refuses every offer of assistance and walks out to meet his former comrades alone. The Wildcat fighters expect age and grief to have weakened him. His first exchanges prove that the strength from his mercenary days never disappeared. Wildcat squads attack from both sides to split Gillian's attention and reach the carriage. He controls the narrow passage with several weapons at once. When mounted fighters charge, he turns their own horses into obstacles against the men following behind them. Viego forces his way closer, while the surrounding squads keep Jillian occupied. Years of resentment turn every strike into an accusation. He declares that the captain who ruined their lives has no right to stand in the way of what they became afterward. Jillian refuses to defend the decision that ended Ratatosk. He says that he is no longer their commander and will not return to the past they worship. His life now belongs to the future young lord Ghislaine intends to build. The rejection only deepens Viego's hatred, and he promises that he will kill Jillian regardless of his new allegiance. As the duel continues, Viego condemns Gillian for abandoning the company they built together. He lists comrades who sacrificed their youth, bodies, and futures to make Ratatosk legendary. In his eyes, disbanding the group made every sacrifice meaningless. Becoming a noble servant afterward feels like the final betrayal of everything their captain represented. Viego claims the years after Ratatosk only made him stronger. While Jillian wasted away beside his sick daughter, the 5th Unit commander continued surviving real battles. He commits everything to proving that the famous old captain has become obsolete. Viego hurls a dagger at Jillian and declares the duel finished. Jillian catches the incoming dagger with a hand covered in tightly controlled mana. The effortless stop reveals that he has not been using his full strength against any of the attackers. Jillian asks why Viego waited years to seek revenge if the hatred was truly this deep. The answer is crueler than anger. His broken former self was considered too pathetic to fight and too miserable to be worth killing. Jillian refuses to let their final meeting end with Viego striking from despair. He orders his former subordinate to stand and raise a weapon properly. For this one moment, Gillian will answer him as Ratatosk's captain rather than Ghislaine's servant. Viego gathers everything left in his body for one final exchange. Jillian meets the attack directly and ends the duel without hatred. As the defeated man falls, the old captain promises to remember Viego Valanos, 5th Unit commander of Ratatosk. With Viego defeated, Gillian finishes the remaining ambushers before they can reorganize. The canyon finally falls quiet around the damaged convoy. Belinda immediately notices that the attackers' weapons and equipment can be sold to recover some useful money. Ghislaine remembers hearing stories about Jillian long before he became the mercenary king. Those stories helped lead him toward the mercenary life in the first place. Now he resolves to locate other valuable comrades from the old future before death, poverty, or enemy recruitment scatters them beyond reach. 2 days later, the battered group finally reaches the border of Perdium. Ghislaine looks across the familiar land and remembers when he believed this homecoming would always remain available, no matter how long he stayed away. Ghislaine does not hide the condition of the territory he wants Gillian to serve. He points out outdated homes, abandoned fields, and farmers forced into military service by the endless Northern War. Ghislaine calls Reconstruction a long battle against Duke Delphine's entire network and swears that he will revive the land no matter what it costs. The Reconstruction plan feels possible until a familiar silhouette appears near the estate. Ghislaine stops cold as he realizes that his father has returned from the Northern Front. The silhouette outside Perdium Castle belongs to Ghislaine's father, Count Zuwalter Perdium, finally returned from the Northern Front. Inside the castle, Zuwalter and his officers are already confronting the territory's desperate finances. Rayfold has reduced its support while gathering soldiers and food, yet the damaged Forest of Beasts garrison still needs rebuilding, leaving them to consider cutting an army that can barely hold the front line. Nothing has changed in Ghislaine's absence. Knight Captain Randolph, Treasurer Albert, and Administrator Homern are still trying to stretch an exhausted territory far beyond its means. Ghislaine has been away only a few months in this life, but after decades as the mercenary king, seeing his father again feels like crossing an entire lifetime. The strict man he once resented now looks worn down by the weight of protecting every life in Perdium. Zwalter questions his week-long absence and his visit to Rayfold. Homern worries that the reckless heir gambled again, while Ghislaine insists the duel money was an investment and that he only had business with Amelia. The discussion turns to Jamal and Philip. Randolph cannot believe Ghislaine personally killed 2 trained traitors, so Ghislaine avoids provoking him and allows the captain to assume the pair weakened each other first. Instead of anger, Zwalter quietly praises him. Whatever the details, Elena survived, and the first compliment Ghislaine can remember receiving from his father leaves him genuinely stunned. Ghislaine uses the moment to ask for permission. After Homern and Albert list his old disasters and warn that no reward money is coming, he reveals the real request, authority to pioneer the Forest of Beasts. Zwalter refuses so fiercely that the matter ends immediately, but Ghislaine tells Belinda and Jillian that the request was only a courtesy. The forest is considered a death trap with nothing worth claiming, yet he intends to enter it regardless. What nobody else knows is that a massive runestone vein lies near the forest entrance. The mana-infused ore is indispensable to magical tools, barriers, scrolls, alchemy, and research. And in Ghislaine's first life, Duke Delphine was the one who eventually discovered it. Jillian accepts that his new master must have a plan. Ghislaine orders Belinda to hire roughly 200 mercenaries, then agrees that a force that large could become dangerous unless he and Jillian personally select the people worth keeping. His target is the strongest small mercenary company in the north, Cerberus, talented fighters infamous for turning on employers when a job goes badly. Ghislaine plans to put a leash on those so-called crazy dogs. At Cerberus's camp outside Zimbar territory, the mercenaries mistake the approaching young noble for easy money and begin imagining how thoroughly they can exploit him. Ghislaine answers their welcome with immediate violence. His sudden attack drops the first men before the camp understands what is happening, and the survivors rush to arms, warning that noble blood will not save him now. Unmoved by the threats surrounding him, Ghislaine cuts straight through their posturing and gives a single order: stop talking and bring him their captain. At Cerberus's camp, Ghislaine demands to see their captain immediately. The surrounding mercenaries laugh at the noble who walked into their territory, attacked their men, and now behaves like the one in command. Their first serious attacker swings a chained blade at Ghislaine. Ghislaine jams his sword into the chain and locks the weapon in place. The technique collapses in an instant, proving that reason will not reach men who only respect strength. He tells Gillian to leave them alive, but only barely. The veteran obeys, and the camp's confidence collapses as both newcomers begin tearing through every fighter sent against them. Cerberus keeps throwing more men into the battle to recover its wounded pride. Ghislaine sends them back as small fry and repeats his demand for the only person he came to see. The commotion finally wakes Kaor, captain of the Cerberus mercenaries. He demands to know why a prospective client has beaten half his camp before introducing himself. Ghislaine calls the violence his own form of greeting, chosen specifically to tame the group before discussing the job. Kaor suppresses his anger long enough to hear the request. Ghislaine wants Cerberus to pioneer the monster-filled Forest of Beasts and introduces himself as Ghislaine Perdium, heir to the territory beside it. The name confirms every rumor Kaor has heard about Perdium's reckless young lord. He dismisses Ghislaine as a sheltered rookie who cannot understand the forest and declares the negotiation over. Ghislaine calls that refusal fear and mocks Cerberus's reputation. Kaor sees through the provocation, refuses a job with no worthwhile return, and offers to let him leave only after paying compensation for the trouble. Ghislaine refuses. Instead, he formally challenges Kaor to Moriana's recognition, an old mercenary wager that immediately changes the mood of everyone in the camp. The rules are savage. Both fighters share one dagger, bind one arm together, stay inside a tiny circle, and use no mana. Either combatant may die, while the loser must admit defeat and obey the winner absolutely. To mercenaries, rejecting the challenge is the same as confessing weakness. Kaor cannot understand how a noble knows their dirtiest tradition, but with his men watching, refusal is impossible. Cerberus prepares the arena and warns Ghislaine that retreat is no longer an option. Kaor boasts that he has survived Moriana's recognition 5 separate times. Ghislaine's response silences the camp. 5 bouts are nothing to the former mercenary king. He has fought this ritual more than 100 times. Kaor stares in disbelief as Ghislaine claims to have survived Moriana's recognition more than 100 times. The fighters bind one arm together and enter a circle barely large enough for them to stand. A single dagger becomes the only permitted weapon. Kaor immediately uses his greater size to drive Ghislaine backward. The blade flashes between attacks, blocks, and near misses as neither man can create safe distance. Kaor calls the claim an absurd boast and presses his physical advantage. Without mana, the tiny arena favors his weight and reach, and from outside the circle it appears that Ghislaine can do little more than endure. Belinda prepares to intervene if her young master is truly threatened. Ghislaine keeps defending without calling for help. Even successful blocks transmit the impact through his unprotected body, steadily accumulating pain in his arms and legs. Confident he has deciphered Ghislaine's strategy, Kaor explains that every block and controlled hit is still weakening him. He believes the noble's resistance has already reached its limit. Kaor invites Ghislaine to struggle because breaking a stubborn opponent is more entertaining. He launches a brutal sequence that attacks every escape allowed by their tied arms. The mercenaries cheer as their captain forces Ghislaine backward. A final committed thrust appears to leave the young noble no path except death. At the last possible instant, Ghislaine slips away from a position that should have offered no escape. He redirects the force traveling through their tied arms. The movement gives him Kaor's rhythm and enough room to cut the captain again. The balance of the match finally reverses. Ghislaine stops opposing Kaor's force and allows it to enter his own flow. Every time the larger man strains for control, his muscles stiffen and reduce his ability to adjust. Ghislaine exploits that lost flexibility to overcome the weight difference through technique. Even Kaor's men grow impatient as their captain loses ground. Kaor admits Ghislaine's discipline and concedes a slight disadvantage in a direct fight, but he reminds Ghislaine that drawing blood is not the only path to victory. Moriana's rules also declare anyone who touches outside the circle the loser. Kaor abandons the dagger exchange and wraps his arms around Ghislaine. He hurls the smaller fighter toward the boundary, certain that raw strength has finally decided the match. Ghislaine catches Kaor's arm and turns the larger man's committed throw against him. When Kaor looks down, he realizes that he is the one standing outside the circle. Kaor can barely accept the result, but Ghislaine calmly declares victory and corrects the defeated captain's tone toward the man who now owns his obedience. When Kaor assumes the ordeal is finished, Ghislaine reveals that he himself never left the circle. The wager may be settled, but his new subordinate's training is only beginning. After winning, Ghislaine drags Kaor back into the circle for what he calls subordinate training. Kaor protests that the wager is over, but Ghislaine asks whether he plans to hide behind rules on a real battlefield and orders him never to question his new master. Kaor's men hesitate while their captain screams for help from inside the circle. A few finally prepare to rush Ghislaine together. Belinda ends the debate by drawing her weapon and warning that anyone who interferes with her young master will die. With no rescue coming, Kaor can only endure the punishment. He remembers building his mad dog reputation by frightening weak nobles. Their fear made them grovel while he emptied their pockets for amusement. This time he bitterly realizes he chose a noble far more dangerous than himself. Once Kaor has learned the lesson, Ghislaine stops before the captain bleeds out. He orders the stunned mercenaries to bring water, bandages, and a clean towel. Cerberus obeys instantly, because in their world force has established his authority more clearly than any contract could. Kaor signs the agreement while his injuries are still being treated. Cerberus formally enters Ghislaine's service under the terms of Moriana's recognition. The young lord welcomes them as one family, ending their violent introduction and beginning their real work together. A few days later, 200 hired mercenaries gather outside Perdium. Many expect the inexperienced heir to be easy to exploit, and a hulking fighter called Gordon the Muscle volunteers to represent them. Gordon promises to pressure their employer without pushing so far that the job collapses. The others rally behind his size, confidence, and famous instinct for extracting more money. Ghislaine arrives at the gathering apparently alone. Gordon's group steps forward to intimidate the young employer before he can set the terms. Their confidence disappears when the obedient Cerberus mercenaries emerge behind him, wearing their unmistakable dog-faced helmets. The hired men cannot imagine what made such notorious troublemakers follow an employer so quietly. Ghislaine asks which mercenary speaks for the gathering and identifies Gordon as their chosen leader. He repeats the ridiculous nickname, Gordon the Muscle, and offers only a dry acknowledgement of the man's physique. Ghislaine introduces himself correctly as the young lord of Perdium and orders Gordon to assemble every mercenary. Their objective is no ordinary escort job. From this moment on, they will conquer the forest of beasts. Soon the expedition is fully prepared. A temporary base stands outside the forest of beasts. Supplies fill the carts, and the hired troops are ready to move. Belinda confirms a force of 192 people, 148 agency mercenaries, 41 from Cerberus, and Ghislaine's own party. Scovin has also agreed to conceal their entry from the rest of Perdium. Ghislaine warns everyone that the forest may contain monsters and threats beyond anything they expect. Anyone may leave now, but those who complete the mission will receive triple pay. The promise of triple pay instantly turns panic into noisy enthusiasm. Belinda protests that preparations already consumed most of their available money. Ghislaine trusts the runestone vein will repay every expense and orders the expedition forward. The force begins cutting a road through the dense woods. Fallen trees are trimmed into useful logs while anyone without an axe tears roots from the path. Ghislaine works beside the mercenaries because every additional pair of hands keeps the advance moving. A pioneering record obtained in his first life explains the enormous forest and the resources hidden inside it. Its map gives our protagonist, Ghislaine, the shortest route to the runestone vein. Conquering the entire region can wait. For now, he needs the money required to protect Perdium from Duke Delphine's schemes. Some mercenaries mistake Ghislaine's labor for a nobleman's empty performance. They mock him behind his back and predict that he will collapse once the work becomes uncomfortable. Belinda dislikes the disrespect, but Ghislaine refuses to waste time on pride when every worker gets them out of the forest sooner. The old records describe important resources and monster ecology from Delphine's later conquest, allowing Ghislaine to prepare hundreds of lanterns for dangers nobody else understands. Yet the complete lack of trouble makes him more uneasy, not less. As the forest grows denser and unnaturally dark, the hired men relax because they have seen no insects or monsters. They joke that clearing trees for triple pay may be the easiest job of their lives. Then someone notices that the road they cut has vanished behind them. Despite felling countless trees, every direction now looks like untouched forest. Ghislaine orders everyone to stop talking and pay attention to their surroundings. He tells Gordon to walk toward him, one slow, careful step at a time. Gordon obeys until a tiny mistake disturbs something concealed among the surrounding trees. The others still dismiss Ghislaine as frightened and blame the missing road on identical scenery. One mercenary loudly insists that the forest of beasts is only an ordinary dense forest. When Ghislaine warns him to move, the man argues that their employer is inventing danger to control everyone through fear. The forest answers before the argument can continue. Creatures with no detectable presence suddenly move from the trees, an ambush impossible to predict without Ghislaine's future knowledge. Dirus Ents. The hidden Dirus Ents seize the expedition without warning. Gordon hacks at the nearest creature, but his weapon cannot cut through its hardened bark. Vines tighten around his body and lift him away from the formation. Panic spreads when every ordinary attack proves useless against the moving trees. Ghislaine moves first, cutting Gordon free and testing the creatures at close range. While the mercenaries scatter, he identifies their eyes as a vulnerable point and forces the stunned group to focus. He orders a tight shield formation so the vines cannot isolate anyone, then has Kaor distribute the oil lamps prepared in advance. The strange cargo finally makes sense. They are weapons. At Ghislaine's command, the first volley of burning lamps crashes into the Ents. Oil spreads across their bark and the fire catches immediately. The flames are not yet strong enough to consume their massive bodies, and the monsters continue advancing through the heat. Ghislaine sends the other mercenaries to reinforce Cerberus and prepare another volley. He leaves the protection of the shield line and deliberately draws attention to himself. The walking trees turn away from the formation and pursue the isolated target exactly as he intended. Once the creatures crowd together, he gives the signal. A concentrated storm of oil and flame engulfs them, and the expedition keeps throwing lamps until the entire group appears to be burning. Relief comes too soon. The mercenaries celebrate the Ent's weakness to fire and worry, only that the blaze may spread. But Ghislaine warns that the real fight has not begun. Steam explodes from the burning bodies and smothers the remaining flames. Fire destroys only the creatures' hardened outer shells. Their water-filled interiors survive the heat and emerge in a softer but far more dangerous true form. With the softened bark stripped away, Ghislaine orders everyone to draw steel. The ranged plan has done its job, and now the expedition charges into close combat. The hired mercenaries hesitate when Ghislaine orders them into close combat against the towering Ents. Cerberus charges first because Kaor's wager leaves no room to question the command. Their blades cut through the exposed bodies, proving that the burned shells are gone and mana is no longer required. Belinda warns Ghislaine to be careful while Jillian commands the others to trust his order. Seeing their employer lead from the front finally drives the remaining fighters past their fear. Ghislaine knows hesitation kills. His role as commander is to erase it and make his followers believe the impossible can be done, and under that momentum, the expedition destroys every Ent. Ghislaine reforms the exhausted troops before relief can become carelessness. He reminds them that monsters this dangerous appeared at only the forest entrance. He promises to keep taking the lead, and this time the mercenaries answer with genuine trust. More monsters attack as the road advances deeper into the forest. The mercenaries no longer scatter, and the force begins moving as one. They shelter near Ghislaine, survive each assault, and sharpen into a disciplined fighting unit through real combat. The survivors eventually reach a clear lake hidden within the trees. According to the pioneering record, it is the crucial junction leading toward the runestone vein. Ghislaine orders camp built with the water at their backs and finally allows the expedition to rest. Fear returns once the mercenaries have enough time to think around the campfire. A man named Manus argues that they should secretly turn back before the forest grows worse. He claims Ghislaine is chasing glory and will eventually sacrifice hired men as shields like every other noble. The others point out that returning alone through the monsters would be suicide. They also remember that Ghislaine has repeatedly placed himself in danger to save them. Nearby, he personally cleans their wounds and spends precious medicine without treating a mercenary's life as disposable. That example ruins Manus's attempt to gather support. Ghislaine ignores the grumbling for now and calls Jillian and Kaor aside to discuss a more urgent danger. Only 24 of the lamps hung around camp remain in place. More strangely, the attacks that came day and night stopped during the last 2 nights. Ghislaine understands the implication. They have entered the domain of powerful nocturnal monsters, and the most dangerous part of the journey begins here. That night, another lantern rises from its hook, as though carried by invisible hands. The light floats away and vanishes into the dark. Gordon glimpses a monster beside him, but by the time the camp responds, nothing visible remains. The first men dismiss Gordon's panic as a nightmare caused by exhaustion. Several others confirm hearing strange laughter and watching the light fade. The agreement proves that something real entered the camp. Ghislaine gathers the entire expedition because an unseen enemy is already inside their perimeter. Ghislaine explains that hundreds of Pallars have followed them from the lake. These shadow hunters can merge completely with darkness and ignore ordinary physical attacks. They steal every source of light until their chosen prey is helpless in terrain made for them. Ghislaine refuses to provoke a longer hunt. He plans to wait for their attack and destroy the entire pack at once, using the magic scrolls Belinda quietly distributed to every mercenary. The Pallars surround 3 sides of camp, but the lake prevents a complete encirclement. Though outnumbered, Ghislaine holds the initiative because he chose the campsite knowing this battle would come. Ghislaine sketches a battle plan built around 3 coordinated units. A shield unit and crossbow unit will hold the center, while Ghislaine personally leads an elite assault unit. The shields and crossbows will form a tight center capable of enduring the first charge. His assault group will sweep through the Pallars' exposed left flank. After breaking that flank, the assault group will return to the center and complete an encirclement. If the center holds long enough, the dangerous plan can work. The men question how any formation can strike monsters immune to weapons. Ghislaine answers with the prepared scrolls, the crucial tool revealed by Delphine's future expedition records. When the final lantern disappears, the hidden pack attacks. The mercenaries hold formation until Ghislaine activates the first circle light magic, exploiting the Pallars' extreme aversion to brightness. The first circle scrolls release brilliant light in every direction. Darkness tears away from the camp and exposes eel-like bodies surrounding the formation. For the first time, the invisible hunters can be seen clearly and struck by ordinary weapons. The shield line braces as the revealed Pallars begin their charge. Crossbows fire to slow the center, and Ghislaine launches his assault unit into the exposed flank. Ghislaine's assault unit tears into the Pallars' exposed flank. Their ability to hide is terrifying, but once revealed, their bodies are fragile enough for this elite group to cut through rapidly. Jillian absorbs the charge and holds the monster's attention with his heavy weapons. Kaor attacks from unpredictable angles to disrupt their formation, while Belinda creates openings for Ghislaine. Together, the 4 operate like the elite corpurdium never possessed in his first life. The central force nearly exhausts its bolts before Ghislaine's unit breaks through. He reaches the defenders, orders a full encirclement, and turns their desperate stand into a counterattack. The Pallars retreat before the trap closes, but Ghislaine refuses to let them escape. They obsessively pursue chosen prey, so he orders Belinda to find the horned leader directing the pack and end the threat permanently. Belinda searches the retreating mass for the horned creature giving the signals. She locates the commander and points it out before the pack can disappear into darkness. Ghislaine closes the distance, reaches the horned Pallar, and delivers the decisive strike. With their leader dead, the Pallars lose the coordination that made the pack so dangerous. Cerberus presses the retreat while the hired mercenaries close every escape. The last monster falls, and the camp erupts in exhausted relief. Ghislaine immediately reorganizes the survivors and has Pallar corpses spread around camp. Their scent repels lesser monsters, securing the area after 10 days of fighting and leaving only the runestone vein ahead. The head count reveals 3 contracted mercenaries missing, while Cerberus remains intact. Manus is among the vanished, and the lack of bodies makes it obvious that he secretly fled during the battle. Manius urges the other deserters to keep running before the monsters recover. He refuses to slow down even when the men behind him begin falling silent. When nobody answers at all, he looks back and discovers that something enormous has followed them through the dark. After the night battle, the scent of dead Pallars keeps lesser monsters away from the expedition. The mercenaries exploit the safety to clear the forest at full speed and fill cart after cart with useful timber. The once lazy mercenaries now work without waiting for orders. Repeated battles have taught them to cooperate, maintain formation, and trust a shared command. Ghislaine plans to hire them permanently because that discipline can become the foundation of a real army. A scout returns with the news Ghislaine has been waiting for. He orders everyone forward at maximum speed because the expedition's true destination is directly ahead. The trees open onto the expedition's true destination. A vast, top-grade runestone vein rises from the forest floor. The mercenaries finally understand why Ghislaine risked the forest, while his maid, Belinda, can hardly believe that the rare mineral covers the ground in front of them. Celebration stops when Manus reappears near the vein in terror. As the surrounding mist shifts, it reveals human and monster corpses scattered across the ground. Jillian identifies the area as the nest of a high-ranking creature, while Ghislaine realizes toxic gas concealed a danger absent from the future records. Ghislaine orders everyone to prepare for battle and move away from the corpses. A colossal body strikes before the formation is ready. Even a mana-enhanced attack barely leaves a scratch across its scales. Poison spreads through the mist as an enormous serpent tears into the expedition. Its body is large enough to crush several fighters with one movement. The coils shatter the line, and Ghislaine's companions struggle to locate their young master inside the chaos. Ghislaine recognizes the true owner of the vein, a blood python, a monster, his old expedition plan considered impossible to hunt. Retreat offers the safer odds, but abandoning the mine would waste every sacrifice and leave him without time to stop Perdium's future, so he chooses to fight. Ghislaine releases the third mana core despite the damage it will cause his body. He throws himself against the blood python and refuses to let the burdens he carries be crushed with the expedition. He attacks despite the terrible odds because some battles cannot be avoided. For Ghislaine, responsibility means confronting the danger now, even when victory is uncertain. The python refuses to fall, and maintaining the third core rapidly drains his mana. Jillian and the others reach him and beg their young master to withdraw while they hold the creature back. Instead of retreating himself, Ghislaine orders everyone else to leave the vein. He cannot guarantee their safety against a monster this large. He insists on remaining alone to finish the fight and protect the future he came here to build. The mercenaries refuse to abandon the employer who repeatedly protected them. His leadership kept them alive, and his treatment proved that he values their lives. They ask Ghislaine to trust them in return, while Jillian volunteers to create the opening he needs. The blood python's size makes one direct hit powerful enough to kill any fighter present. Its poison and mana-resistant scales eliminate most ordinary attack plans. Yet Ghislaine has damaged its right eye and exposed a wound, giving the united expedition a single target and a possible path home. They attack together and force the blood python to divide its attention. Ghislaine knows future knowledge cannot control every event, but refusing to act will let Perdium's people die again. Our protagonist, Ghislaine, reaches the blood python's head and raises his blade for the decisive strike, carrying every burden he refuses to lose. He forces his way through the monster's attack with one conviction. He alone knows the territory's future, and he will become the future that saves it. 15 days after the secret expedition began, Perdium's officials finally discover where the heir went. Treasurer Albert calls the disobedience an act of treason. He condemns Scoven's false reports and demands that Ghislaine be imprisoned the moment he returns. Count Zwolter listens without revealing whether he accepts Albert's demand. Before he can answer, Randolph bursts into the chamber with urgent news. Ghislaine has returned from the Forest of Beasts. Ghislaine returns to Perdium at the head of an expedition nobody expected to survive. He greets the father whose direct order he deliberately disobeyed and waits for judgment. Count Zwolter condemns the unauthorized mission and the risk of drawing monsters toward the estate. Ghislaine apologizes for breaking the order. He refuses to pretend the expedition was unnecessary, infuriating the officials waiting to punish him. A letter from Count Rayfold brings a second crisis. Amelia has portrayed the 20,000 gold as extortion, causing Rayfold to cancel both its financial support and her engagement to Ghislaine. Worse, every coin has already been spent on the forest operation. Albert declares that wasting the money and losing Rayfold's support has destroyed the estate's future. He demands Ghislaine's immediate arrest. Ghislaine interrupts the sentence by promising to replace every lost support payment himself, including the entire 20,000 gold. Belinda presents a top-grade runestone mined from the Forest of Beasts. When the officials argue that one stone cannot fund Perdium, Ghislaine reveals that it is only a sample. Carts overflow with runestone, Dirus Ent bark, and valuable blood python materials, while most of the vein remains unmined. The fortune is large enough that Perdium may never again struggle for basic support funds. Ghislaine attaches firm conditions to the financial support he is providing. Scoven and Ricardo must be released, and public access to the forest must remain restricted. Ghislaine will also recruit and command his own mercenaries and security forces. Albert objects to a private army, but he cannot reject the money keeping Perdium alive. Zwolter inspects the returning force and listens as the rare materials are sorted for preservation. The blood python's venom, blood, flesh, and hide will all be processed separately. Even Randolph admits the mercenaries resemble an elite unit and cannot understand how Ghislaine made such unruly fighters willingly follow him. Ghislaine gives the credit to the men who survived beside him. His father recognizes their achievement, overlooks the disobedience this once, and warns that another violation will carry consequences. Zwalter sees the spirit of the Northern Wolf in his heir, the title carried by Perdium's frontier count. Ghislaine remembers how his father defended a poor, isolated territory for his entire life. In the ruined future, that sacrifice ended with Zwalter dying alone and being forgotten by nearly everyone he protected. Despite poison and injuries from the blood python, Ghislaine refuses to rest. He asks Belinda to prepare for another immediate departure and trusts her to keep the exhausted force moving. News of the runestone will soon reach every enemy coveting Perdium. Ghislaine intends to use the short advantage to strengthen his army until nobody dares challenge the territory. An urgent shout interrupts the planning before he can issue the next orders. The enemy responds as soon as Ghislaine's success is confirmed. Duke Delphine's faction orders a territorial war designed to destroy Perdium and install a new ruler. 2 hidden retainers will carry the body of Degald's missing heir into his territory as justification for war. Victor, Count Desmond's strongest hidden weapon, receives command of the operation. The conspirators prepare to move openly because the forest discovery has accelerated the Duke's timetable. Amelia also learns that Ghislaine secured the runestone mine with the gold taken from her. Her assassins failed, and the attempt to cut Perdium's support only made her look foolish. She forces herself to put the anger aside and choose a calculated response. Perdium has the ore, but no established buyer. Amelia predicts that Ghislaine must approach the top-ranked Crimson Tower, led by the 7th Circle Archmage Delmood. She orders Wildcat teams to ambush the transport routes, attack the workers rather than Ghislaine, and steal the shipment before a supply chain can form. She dismisses the declining Crimson Tower as too poor to attract him, and vows to take everything back. The story returns to Ghislaine inside the blood python. Its venom dissolves prey before digestion, while his third core burns the poison and fills the enclosed body with toxic fumes. Losing consciousness means death, so he clings to the expedition, his loved ones, and the future. He refuses to surrender. Unable to avoid the venom, he pulls it into his mana core. With control refined beyond ordinary human limits, he neutralizes the poison in the core's rotation and uses it as fuel to withstand repeated mana explosions. Ghislaine wakes in his own room without understanding how he returned there. 2 full days have passed since his body finally collapsed. Elena has stayed beside him, and her shout brings Belinda running the moment she realizes her brother is conscious. Ghislaine remembers pushing his poisoned body until the expedition safely returned. 2 days of sleep have restored him far too quickly for the damage he suffered. The blood python's energy appears to have fused with his mana, increasing his capacity and suggesting a dangerous method that could multiply his strength. Testing the new mana will have to wait. 2 days have given Perdium's enemies time to learn about the mine, so Ghislaine prepares to gather the mercenaries. His father enters before he can leave, and quietly confirms that the poisoning did not cause lasting harm. After Elena's worried scolding, Count Zwalter asks to speak with Ghislaine alone. This time, the father who refused the expedition has a request of his own. Once Ghislaine recovers, his father brings him to the training ground. It is their first private conversation in years. In his first life, Ghislaine always avoided moments like this because he expected only another scolding. He remembers his mother explaining that Zwalter hides every feeling behind the duty of being Perdium's unshakable pillar. The Count is not cold, merely terrible at expressing the love and fear beneath his rough manner. Instead of stating his request, Zwalter tells his son to pick up a sword. They begin sparring without another explanation. Ghislaine feels the weight of the sword that held back the northern barbarians, while protecting everything his father valued. Zwalter's strength is brutal enough to dominate the frontier, yet carefully controlled enough to protect his son. Zwalter praises Ghislaine's improvement, but identifies the pressure announcing each attack. He teaches his son to conceal that intent until the blade is already moving. Ghislaine realizes that a lifetime of instinctive combat never gave him formal instruction, and his father's precise guidance fills gaps experience alone could not reveal. The Count admits he meant to scold him. Merit cannot excuse broken rules, yet Ghislaine now acts for something beyond personal glory. Zwalter asks him to continue protecting Perdium and accept the responsibilities of its successor. Only then does Ghislaine ask what request brought them here. After all the solemn instruction, Zwalter hesitates and awkwardly asks whether his newly wealthy son has any money. Ghislaine returns to the Forest of Beasts encampment and reunites with the mercenaries. He asks Jillian about Rachel before discussing business. The veteran reports that his daughter is walking again, another life changed by the future knowledge Ghislaine brought back. Ghislaine tells Belinda, Jillian, and Kaor that Perdium is in immediate danger. He explains the attempt on Elena, the planted body of Degald's heir, and the hidden forces preparing war. The runestone mine has made their weak territory an even more tempting target. Ghislaine refuses to warn every retainer because enemy spies may already be inside the estate. Until those spies are identified, the danger must remain within this small group. His companions accept the secrecy and pledge to follow him through the coming battle, trusting the man who brought them through the forest alive. Their greatest enemy is Duke Delphine, supported by Count Desmond and Amelia. Knowing Amelia expects the ore to travel toward the wealthier Crimson Tower, Ghislaine chooses the declining tower of Red Flame instead, avoiding the route prepared for an ambush. The Red Flame Tower may offer less money and little prestige, but that makes it the one destination his enemies will underestimate. Ghislaine also has a particular person there whom he intends to find. At the Tower of Red Flame, a young woman waits beneath her teacher's fading legacy and wonders when the promised light will finally arrive, unaware that Ghislaine is already on his way.